Hey everyone, I've got about 33 minutes to go before I have to clock back in from lunch, but yeah, you see the title above or below, depending on how you watch this. But yeah, apparently there are sources out there that report that IDW Comics will be doing a hard reboot on the Sonic comics. Now, we expected a reboot to happen, but a hard one, well, let's break down exactly what a hard reboot is. Now, mainly a reboot, I should say, overall, it's just, another take on a very popular franchise, or a very popular series, or a popular character, or groups of characters for that matter. They're basically a different take on how they came about, a different take on the origins, a different take on how they met certain allies, friends, love interests, backgrounds, you name it. It's just another take on it. Now what's funny is when you add when you add additional wording to something like reboot, it kind of changes the emphasis of the meaning. Now, reboot, basically, like I said, is you're just rebooting the series. A good example is the several times Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, from a movie perspective, have been rebooted. We know that Spider-Man is going through its third reboot, or sort of reboot, as far as movies are concerned. We know they had the Sam Raimi trilogy. And I'm sorry for the bad connection here. Like I said, we have the official MCU run. And the MCU run could be looked at as sort of a soft reboot, because you're rebooting the movie portion of the Spider-Man franchise, but not entirely. You're just rebooting it to the point that his origin has already taken place. And you're just basically going from there. You're adding new dimension and depth to the character instead of just going through the same thing we had gone through in the past two incarnations. Same with the Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four had a low budget, made for television, and I think semi theatrical release back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. That didn't do so well. So many years later, if not a decade or so later, a little over a decade later, 20th Century Fox decides to basically reboot the Fantastic Four as a movie franchise, and thus we got the first one and the second one, Rise of the Silver Surfer, as the first attempt at a rebooted Fantastic Four movie franchise. Now, unfortunately, these Fantastic Four movies didn't do so well. Well, actually, the first one did okay to the point that it was garnered a sequel, but after that, it just didn't go. It fell through. But then, so you take a look at. So after that, what do? They wait several years later, and several years later, and they try to go the dark, grittier route with the Fantastic Four reboot that they did 3 years ago, a little less than that. And how do they reboot this? by making the Fantastic Four younger, if not just out of high school going into college kind of age range. And how else do they do it? By basically switching up a little bit of the origin, especially that of Sue Storm and Johnny Storm. And how do they do this? By making Sue Storm the adopted daughter of Johnny's family, and by basically making Johnny African American, which isn't a bad thing, because there are a lot of characters in comic book or video game adaptations, comic book and video game movie adaptations that have had the authenticity, easy for me to say, authenticity, I should say, changed around to match with the current times, the current generation. So it's no surprise to that. It's no real surprise. Unfortunately, the movie didn't do so well, and a lot of people didn't like the changes that the movie went through. Nobody liked them. Nobody liked the changes that the movie went through to try to make it more modern, more darker, more gritty. Nobody liked it. And they didn't like it to the point that the movie bombed. The same thing when Jem and the Holograms came out. Instead of trying to stay true somewhat to what made Jem and the Holograms what they were originally, the people behind the movie decide to basically reboot it for modern times, change aspects about it that nobody could understand, and nobody understood why they were doing it and didn't like them doing it. And the reboot version failed. You know, say what you will about Transformers, the Michael Bay Transformer films and eventual spin-offs like the Bumblebee movie next year. And say what you will about the G.I. Joe films, but at least in some sense they somewhat stayed true to what made them who they were. They stayed true to somewhat of the consistency of what made Transformers, what made G.I. Joe. And yeah, they may have not done so well in theaters, or even if they did well box office wise, didn't do so well from a continuity or story perspective, they still kind of stay true to the lore of the of what made Transformers, and what made G.I. Joe. Jem didn't do any of that. The only connection it ever had was at the beginning of the film, where the main characters dress up like the Jem characters of the 80s cartoon, say certain lines, and then that's it. You know, no one could understand, why this was happening. Why they didn't stay true somewhat to what made Jem. So you can look at that as basically, now you could look at that as well as some of the Fantastic Four movies, and even some of the Spider-Man movies before that, as reboots, if not hard reboots. Especially if you look at the darker, grittier Fantastic Four. You take a look at the Jem movie, and you can consider them to be like hard reboots. Basically to where things were changed up completely. It's like it didn't make any sense. It just didn't make any sense in the eyes of fans, the eyes of people that were part of the franchise for generations and decades. It just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. So with that in mind, when you add a word to the word reboot, it kind of changes, like I said, the emphasis, like I said earlier, the emphasis of what a reboot is. A reboot flat out is, hey, you're just rebooting the whole thing. You know, you're staying true. You're kind of keeping some of the elements of what it was, of what made a franchise or a character or whatever, who they were or or what they were originally, but you're rebooting it to either keep up with the times. Like I said, you're either rebooting it to keep up with the times, or you're rebooting it to make it sound more sensible, more like easier for people to follow. But when you say things like hard reboot, a hard reboot, like I said, is a good example of that. Fantastic Four, and somewhat, you know, well, not really Fantastic Four, because now that I think about it, as much of a bomb and a failure that movie was from the start, the dark and grittier one, at least they tried in some sense to stay true to the origin of how they got the powers. True, they didn't go through a portal. That was sort of a hard reboot there, sort of a reboot of how they got the powers there. But they stayed true to it by having them basically on another planet, or landing, or showing up on another planet. Not landing in this case, but or not crash landing, but showing up on another planet. And because of the planet's radiation and stuff, they ended up getting the powers. Now, with that said, a hard reboot, like I said, is when you basically start from scratch. You're like, hey, let's just make this more up to date for modern times. Maybe we'll throw in a reference here and there, but that's about it. A hard reboot is, when you think about it, is what they did with Gem. They basically threw everything that made Gem originally and just went a different route. You know, that's what they did. And not many people were fans of it. Not many people were fans of it, and the reason they weren't fans is because it was not Gem. It was, in a sense, as some people will put it, a Josie and the Pussycats clone. It's not just another coming-of-age story of young girls, high schoolers, whatever, trying to make it big as artists that we had seen time and time again, and all they did was slap on Gem, the name Gem, and the holograms to get people's attention. Now, a soft reboot, that's when you add the word hard to it. But when you add the word soft reboot, a soft reboot is basically, from what I understand, keeping things the way they were in a sense, but you're basically rebooting to the point that even though continuity-wise some things still stay the same, story-wise and continuity-wise things stay the same, there are some things that have changed, either in character design, either in historic references and acknowledgments, stuff like that. But with those few exceptions, and even the debut and disappearance of certain characters, like I said, even though you had the debut and even though with the exception of debuts and disappearances, removals of certain characters from the timeline, with those few exceptions, and like I said, some historical changes and stuff, the story still remains the same. The storyline, the consistency, in a sense, still remains the same. And although there's a Frank Hill who just said hi to me, and it's Frank Hill on YouTube. Anyway, some things still remain the same. So that's a soft. So when you put the word soft with the word reboot, you're basically acknowledging that yes, we are rebooting, but we're mostly keeping everything story-wise, continuity-wise, the same. We're just switching up like historical, like the only changes we're making is like to historical events, or the removal of certain, disappearance and removal of certain characters, the debut of new characters, you know, stuff like that. That's all they're doing. And that's all they're doing because they're mainly keeping everything from a story perspective and continuity perspective somewhat the same, with, like I said, a few vital changes here and there that people may or may not like. So when sources come out, and we don't know who these sources are, mind you. Some people just said there are sources. TSSZ doesn't know who these sources are. Nothing's come from IDW. Nothing has come from Sega. Nothing has come, I think, from TSSZ itself. But some people are saying at places like the Sonic Stadium and elsewhere that IDW Comics is planning to do a hard reboot on the Sonic comics. Now, we know they got his editor, I can't think of his name right now, that has worked on comics before, sometimes being very dark and graphic comics. We know that. But he's no stranger to kind of, I think, understanding what the fans want. And if IDW comes out and says, hey, and if someone like Chris Ryall and IDW comes out and says, hey, we're going to talk to fan favorite creators, and we're going to talk to new potential creators and fan favorite creators and stuff like that, and even in my case are willing to sit through almost a 20-minute audio vid with you, where I'm using basically, JPEGs and screenshots of the Archie comics during the post 252 run, and even screenshots from the Blast of the Past episode of Sonic Sat AM, and kind of explain to him in a sense, and kind of give a suggestion and kind of explain, in a sense to him what we fans would like to see and hope to see. And he's happy, and someone like him is, comes out, as quickly as he did in my case, and says, hey, I'm happy to see this. I'm happy to hear this passion and this kind of response from fans like you. That tells me that whatever sources are saying is going to be a hard reboot, I kind of have to say we have to take with a grain of salt. Because I'm believing, in my opinion, that you can't take nearly 25 years of characters, 24 years of characters, nearly 25 years of characters, storytelling, whatever, and flush it down the toilet, or lock it up, will never see the light of day again, just because you want to do a hard reboot. One thing I mentioned to Chris in IDW in that fans message video is I said the one thing that should really cinch it for them is the Sonic comic, when it was under the Archie license, or the Archie Comics run, became the world's longest running video game based comic or media of all time. It set the record for being the world's longest running video game based comic in history. And knowing IDW, I don't think they would want to mess with that. I don't think they'd want to chance, hey, here's this record-setting comic license that we now have our hands on. Do we just throw away 25 years of history, a quarter of a century of history out the window, or do we keep it? Do we keep it in some form or fashion? Do we keep it going in some way, shape, or form? Do we use certain characters do we use beloved characters that fans love, that fans get behind? And I think those are things they have to consider. They have to kind of say, hey, we need to look at this carefully and, consider our options. They really have to. The only reason people would believe these sources of, oh, there's going to be a hard reboot, is because, let's be honest, sometimes that does happen. I even acknowledge that if they have to reboot the comic to the point that they have to appeal to this new generation with the game characters only, We completely understand, only if they can find a way to get characters like Rotor and Bunny and Sally and Antoine into the comic book in some shape or form down the line, either by making a guest appearance for an arc, for a 2 to 3 part arc or whatever, and thus in their own IDW way, make them a part of the new Sonic universe. You know, I'm just saying, and and I think it can be done. I think that could be done. The point I'm trying to make here is, I don't think we can believe any kind of sources unless it comes from official sources. Unless IDW themselves come out and say, yeah, you know, as far as the Sonic comics goes, we're going to do a hard reboot. It's going to be completely new. This is what it's going to be, And maybe Sega says something along the lines, and Sega says something along as well that kind of aligns with what IDW would say. But here's the thing. Here's what people have to remember. Chris Ryall said we'd find out in the near future what was going to happen. He didn't specifically say when or where. So, as far as these sources saying, hey, yeah, the comic is going to be a hard reboot, you have to take with a grain of salt. You really do, because I think, in my honest opinion, these sources are nothing but either trolls, basically people that like to troll certain fan bases out there because they're fans of something that they probably feel is childish or immature or whatever, or they just have nothing else to do. Or it's by people that just want a certain genre or a certain portion of the Sonic franchise showcased. I mean, let's be honest, folks. Let's be honest. Okay? During the Archie run, how many times did we as fans and just overall fans of how many times did we as a fan base, whether we liked the comic as it was, liked the overall structure, whatever, despite its ups and downs, how many times did we deal with trolls, cyberbullies, whatever, that said, oh, we only want this and that, we want Sonic and Amy instead of Sonic and Sally, we want game characters only, you know, Sadie M character, Archie character suck, they must die, How many times have we dealt with that? I tell you, too many to count. Too many to count, and they know it. So that's why, in my opinion, I believe whatever sources are saying, oh, it's going to be a hard, quote-unquote, hard reboot, I think those sources are unfounded. I think we got to take it with a grain of salt and realize that they're unfounded, and they just might be rumors or lies or whatever you want to call them, spread by the fan base, by the portion of the fan base that wants things their way and not willing to compromise. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's many of us that are willing to compromise to the point that, like I said earlier, if they have to reboot it to where the main focus is on the game characters, but somehow down the line, for a story arc or so, you are able to bring in the Sadie M characters, the Sadie M Archie characters, like Sally and Bunny and Rhoda and Antoine Dulce, you name it, for guest appearances, and thus through those guest appearances and IDW debuts, you make them part of the IDW Sonic universe, then that's fine, because at least you're acknowledging their existence, and you're finding in your own unique way to make them part of this new IDW Sonic universe. So, overall, when I hear these sources deal, I look at it like I look at it like the rumors and the sources being thrown out there about certain things happening in wrestling and MMA and all that. All because they want things a certain way and they're not willing to accept reality. I mean, Many people are saying, oh, we want Styles and Nakamura at SummerSlam. I mean, there's sources reporting that Nakamura and Styles will happen at SummerSlam. Those sources may be correct, they may be wrong. Some sources are saying already, oh, Styles and Nakamura are going to do WrestleMania. They're going to main event WrestleMania. Da, 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 da. We don't know that. You see, and now people are reporting, oh, Brock Lesnar is going to fight John Jones. He's going to leave WWE to do it. How do we know that's true? Yeah, you can have John Jones and Brock Lesnar fuel the fire, but unless a deal is struck between WWE and UFC to let Brock go off for a second time and compete in a UFC match, it ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen until either WWE or UFC confirm it. The point is, I look at these sources, like I said, and I take it with a grain of salt, because I feel until we get real proof, until we get straight from the horse's mouth of IDW and Sega, mostly IDW, and Chris Rael, until we get it from them directly, I don't believe a single word these sources say, because I think, in all honesty, these sources are unfounded, and they just want certain things to happen their way because they can't accept the potential of what could occur. And that upsets them. That makes them sick to the stomach. So whatever these sources are, right now, if I'm TSSZ, I take them, and I'm Sega Forums, and I'm, the Fans United for Saturday AM Forums, and Saturday Morning Sonic, and, the Sega Forums and all that. I take these sources with a grain of salt. I don't believe them until I get real proof directly from the sources that are behind this acquisitioning and this changing of the comic guard. I don't believe a word that any so-called unfounded sources say unless we get direct proof. And I think everybody watching this live would agree with that. It's like believing a rumor or believing an unknown, unfounded source saying, oh, Stephen Curry found a way out of his Golden State Warrior contract to go play for the LA Lakers alongside LeBron James. Again, that's just coming from an unknown, unfounded source because they want that to happen, and they probably know in reality it never will happen, maybe not for a long time. The point is, folks, I'm excited for this thing with IDW. I'm hoping for the best. It sounds like Chris Rael is willing to listen not just to fan favorite creators like, say, Ian Flynn, Tracy Yarlin, Leah Baker, and all them, and some newer creators that might be fans of that might have been fans of the Sonic comic, if not the franchise. But if he's willing to listen to fans like me and what we would suggest, and as me, and listen to what we have to say, and listen to what we would suggest, and listen to the advice we could give them as longtime fans and newer fans, I think the IDW run, I think the Sonic run with IDW is in good hands. So as far as these sources go, and they know who they are, unless you got proof, no one is going to believe you. No one's going to believe you, and no one's going to take you seriously. Because let me tell you this. Let me tell you. If IDW and Chris Rael decide to continue the comic where it left off on the Archie books, and then let's say they decide to finally, in their own unique way, try to get Sonic and Sally back together as a couple, that's their decision. It's not up to you. So again, whoever these sources are, I take them with a grain of salt, and I feel that they are totally unfounded and untrue because unless we get proof and confirmation from IDW Publishing and Chris Rael and those involved themselves, I don't believe a single word these sources say. So that's all I'm going to say, folks. I've got about 3 minutes before I have to clock back in, so I'm going to head back into my store. Let me know what you guys think down below. Comment if you like. Thank you all for watching live, and I will talk to you all later. God bless. Take care, and I'm out.